All right, we're going to talk about injuries today and training with injuries, right? And what to do when we get them. I got my nose cracked today. I was warming up a kid, not one of mine, not someone I trained, just someone that was there in the room, trying to get him loose and kind of free flowing, letting him move. And he started spazzing out a lot. You could tell he was green. I guess he's only trained a couple years, and I don't know how consistently. And he heel kicked me in the nose while he was moving around. And that one hurt a little bit, cracked a little bit. I was like, oh, that's good, but I think I'm all right. Sure enough, 5 minutes later or less, in the same roll, it was like an 8 minute warm up. He jumps from standing open guard and jumps to try to take mount and drops his knee right on my nose and cracks it. Sure enough, blood is coming out. I had to go clog it up. Obviously, I don't have any ice at the gym, but I just clog it up and hold off, and it ends up clotting because I don't blow my nose. So over time, it clotted up, and it's okay. I'll probably put ice on it and clean it out with a Q-tip and then reapply some petroleum jelly later. But it made me think. A lot of people would get hit in the nose and break their nose, and after it cracks, like, oh, I'm done training. Let me lay off for weeks. There's no reason to stop training, right? Right now, I can't get hit in the nose, or it's gonna start bleeding everywhere again. But it doesn't mean I can't train. It doesn't mean there's things I can't do. All right, maybe I don't roll with certain people because I might get my nose touched when I'm rolling, and then it'll start bleeding. But that's okay. I don't have to roll to get better, right? I can drill. I can hit mitts. I can work the bag. I can work out. I can do plenty of things with a broken nose. Okay, something different. Say you broke a toe or your foot is hurt. Guess what? You can play open guard, play bottom guard, work escapes. You can drill like crazy. You can do boxing. There's a lot of stuff you can do with an injury. Just because you get an injury doesn't mean that you take off training. If you want to be good in this sport, you got to learn to work through injuries. All right, I've had plenty of injuries in the past 12 years of this training, right? And I've never really taken off. I've had a torn bicep, and I would tie up my arm under a gi and then tie the belt around it, around the gi, so I couldn't get my arm out and roll with one arm. And sure, my ego might affect myself because I would get caught a lot more then, right? And I would be on bottom positions for a long time. But guess what? At the end of that 5 or 6 weeks, when I started getting mobility and strength back in my arm, I could really push my hips out well. And I was great at my escapes. And I didn't just try to bitch press people off, but I was actually moving the way I should and escaping with my hips and with my legs and getting the knee sliced back in. And there's opportunities to grow when you have an injury. Work a different area. Okay? Don't just take off. If you take off every time you have an injury, you will never progress. It'll stop, right? The greatest in the world, they deal with injuries all the time. Most of them go into matches and fights with injuries. One of my fighters in his last fight, a week and a half, 2 weeks out on his last session, hard sparring, I think it was a week and 6 days out, he jacked up his shoulder, went everywhere, tried to get a cortisone. No one would give him a cortisone. And we were like, what's going on? For one, that's why you always have your last hard sparring day 2 weeks out, because 2 weeks is a long time to heal. And but you know what? There was never a thought, oh, we're not going to fight. Oh, we'll throw with the other hand. We'll keep him tight and we'll grapple if we have to instead of striking. And guess what? In his last fight, he did a lot of grappling, and he is a striker, and he did really good in his grappling. Just because he couldn't throw the hard hand how we want doesn't mean that he takes out the fight. Everyone's going into a fight not 100%. It's not unfair. Maybe his injury was more than his opponent's, but I guarantee you his opponent had something that was lingering and annoying. You always will. You need to understand that and have that mindset. It might change how you approach things, but it shouldn't completely limit you. We had another guy who went in with cracked ribs into a fight, right? Couldn't really bend or do anything, but he got the finish from the bottom. Got a sub off his back. Those things will always happen. All right, you be a well-rounded fighter, work multiple areas, and just because you're limited in one area doesn't, and you have an injury in one area that you can't stress enough, like you can't put any strain on it, and it's gonna hurt. You have other opportunities, right? You can always get better. There is no excuse for it. If you have a torn ACL, guess what? You can be doing abs and curls and working on your bridges with one leg and all kinds of stuff all the time. I had a broken ankle. I was doing single leg jump ropes and leg presses and killing my upper body and my core. And I was doing lots of drills while I had a broken ankle. Earlier in the year, I had a torn hamstring. And I continued to, after a couple of days of 5, 6 hours of icing, I continued to get back to work in other areas. Right? No more than a day or two off. It was still hurting. I still couldn't really walk very well. I really couldn't walk at all for the first couple of days. It was a bad limp after that. But I worked around it. You still progress. Otherwise, you're never, not only when you stop do you not progress, but now it's almost like you're going backwards. Because say your skills are 10 out of 10 now. As I've said before, a year from now they're not. So if you stay where you're at even, and then you don't progress with the time, you don't evolve with the times and with the techniques, then you're behind. So another note is recovery on injuries. A lot of people have injuries and it lingers, and they're like 6 weeks later it's still hurting, 12 weeks later it's still hurting, they still have this nagging injury. What are you doing for recovery? I work on recovery on my injuries all the time. Even when I have good days on my shoulder, I still ice it. I know it's a weak area of mine. I know I tend to get injured there on my shoulder quite often. So I will ice it, stretch it, do little exercise with it, put body weight on it, do yoga and work my mobility and my stabilization strength. I'm always working it. I'm always trying to improve it. I will always ice it. I will always heat and then massage it. There are things you can do. I had my hamstring. I was putting taping ice to my hamstring when I tore that. For 5 or 6 hours a day, I had ice on it. And then every night I was doing Epsom salt baths, hot water, and stretching as much as I could and massaging the back of the leg. You have to be active in your recovery if you want to recover. You can't just say, oh, it's still hurting and expect it to get better. No, be active in your recovery. Recovery doesn't mean you lay off of it. Recovery means you're doing things to make it heal and get better, right?